In 2024, the United States government collected $5 trillion and spent nearly $7 trillion, a deficit of $1.8 trillion. Meanwhile, the wealthiest Americans held $46 trillion, enough to cover that shortfall 25 times over. But this isn't an American story. It's a human story. In Britain, the pattern is clear. 2020 research found millionaires whose income comes from investments paid an average effective rate of 35%, the same as workers earning £100,000. Some paid as little as 11%. By 2022, this disparity reached the Prime Minister himself. Rishi Sunak earned nearly £2 million but paid just 22%, while doctors working under him faced 40% rates. In France, luxury goods magnate Bernard Arnault, the world's richest man, uses holding companies in Belgium to minimize taxes. In India, the Ambani family's corporate structure ensures their billions flow through channels that face minimal taxation. The locations change, the names change, but the pattern stays constant. Those with the most pay the least, while those with the least carry the burden. To understand why, we need to go back 500 years to a man who lost everything and, in his loss, saw too much. In 1512, Niccolò Machiavelli was arrested, tortured, and exiled. He'd served the Florentine Republic for 14 years, but when the Medici family returned to power, everything he'd worked for collapsed. He'd lost his position, his income, his place in the world. From his small farm outside Florence, broke and humiliated, he watched how power really worked, and he started writing letters to friends. Bitter, brilliant observations about what he'd seen from inside the system and now saw more clearly from outside. The wealthy Medici banking family appeared to support Florence's government while structuring their wealth to be nearly untouchable. They'd make public shows of generosity while the actual burden of running the city fell on merchants, guilds, and workers. But it wasn't just the Medici. Across Italy, from the Sforza family in Milan to the Borgia in Rome, the same pattern played out. In Germany, the Fugger banking dynasty was doing something similar, lending to emperors and popes while their own fortunes grew faster than they could be taxed. In England, noble families held vast estates structured through primogeniture and trusts that kept wealth within families for generations, largely beyond the crown's reach. Machiavelli saw this clearly because he'd been inside and then thrown out. From exile, he wrote The Prince, not as a celebration of power, but as an autopsy of it. He was describing what he'd witnessed across the Italian states and beyond, how power works when you strip away the mythology. And here's what he understood. The powerful don't break rules. They make sure the rules don't apply to them in the first place. When ProPublica obtained tax returns of America's wealthiest, they revealed what journalists in other countries have found repeatedly. Jeff Bezos, Elon Musk, Mark Zuckerberg, paying little to no income tax in certain years. But this pattern isn't uniquely American. In the UK, wealthy individuals use non-domiciled status to avoid taxes on foreign income even while living in London. In Monaco, there's no income tax at all. The entire principality functions as a tax haven for the ultra-wealthy. Switzerland's cantonal system allows aggressive tax competition that benefits high-net-worth individuals. The Netherlands has become a corporate tax haven through favorable ruling structures. Meanwhile, in Bangladesh, a garment worker pays taxes on every dollar earned. In Brazil, payroll taxes hit workers immediately. In Nigeria, value-added taxes affect the poor disproportionately. In Japan, South Korea, Australia, everywhere, working people face automatic taxation while the wealthy navigate elaborate structures to minimize theirs. This is exactly what Machiavelli observed in Renaissance Europe. Two systems pretending to be one. The merchant guilds of Florence paid taxes, the cloth traders of Flanders paid, the farmers everywhere paid. But the great banking families, the Medici, the Fuggers, the Welzers, structured their empires so wealth flowed through channels that looked like credit, like loans, like anything but taxable income. In his private letters, Machiavelli was scathing about this. He'd spent years trying to raise armies, fund defenses, keep the republic functioning. He knew exactly who paid and who didn't. But in The Prince, he made a colder observation. This is how power works. The powerful don't just have wealth, they have the ability to make their wealth exempt. The modern magic trick relies on a simple alchemy, converting taxable income into untaxed wealth. For centuries, the Fuggers used loans and credit. Today, the mechanism is capital appreciation. The pivotal shift occurred in the late 20th century. In 1982, America's SEC greenlit stock buybacks. In 1986, the UK's Big Bang deregulated its financial sector. Germany's Neue Markt opened in 1997. Japan deregulated finance in the 1980s. Across the developed world, a consensus emerged. Capital must be set free. The result? Before 1982, the stock market had stagnated for over a decade. From 1966 to 1982, the Dow experienced a prolonged bear market, trapped in what traders called a trading range, bottoming at 776.92 in August 1982. But after the SEC allowed stock buybacks in 1982, the index grew 1,409% to close at 11,722.98 by January 2000. By 2024, it reached 43,000. The transformation was complete. The stock market had become a vast, tax-sheltered vault for wealth accumulation. The Medici moved wealth through letters of credit between Florence and Bruges. The Fuggers structured mining operations as credit arrangements. Today's elite move wealth through appreciated stock in New York and London. The geography is digital, but the principle is 500 years old. If your wealth isn't classified as income, it exists in a parallel tax-free universe. You live not on salaries, but on loans against your fortress of assets. And loans aren't income anywhere. Machiavelli watched this in real time. Wealthy Florentine families would lend money to the government during emergencies rather than paying taxes. Florence imposed forced loans on the wealthy, but somehow the richest families ended up as creditors rather than debtors. The city owed them money, not the other way around. Does this sound familiar? Modern governments borrow trillions while sitting on mountains of untaxed wealth. In Renaissance Europe, wealthy families maintained power across generations through primogeniture, entailments, and family trusts that kept estates intact and largely beyond taxation. In England, the great noble families used strict settlement, legal structures that prevented even the current holder from selling or dividing the estate. The wealth wasn't theirs to tax. They were merely custodians for the next generation. In Spain, mayorazgo laws protected noble estates from creditors and tax collectors. In France before the Revolution, the nobility were largely exempt from the taille, the main direct tax. In the Holy Roman Empire, imperial knights held their lands directly from the emperor, dodging local taxation. Today, the mechanisms are different, but the result is identical. In the United States, inherited wealth isn't taxed as income. In the UK, creative use of trusts minimizes inheritance tax. In Germany, family businesses get special inheritance tax exemptions. In Italy, complex corporate structures shield generational wealth. Singapore and Hong Kong have no estate taxes at all. The estate tax in America supposedly captures 40% of large estates, but it raises barely 0.6% of federal revenue. Only about 1 in 700 people who die pay any estate tax at all. Britain's inheritance tax, despite seeming substantial, is avoided by the truly wealthy through agricultural property relief, business property relief, and strategic gifting. But here's the genius Machiavelli would recognize immediately. These taxes still exist. Their existence makes the public think dynastic wealth is being taxed. The appearance of taxation provides political cover, while the reality delivers exemption. In The Prince, Machiavelli wrote about how crucial it is for rulers to appear just, appear to follow the same rules as everyone else, even when they don't. The appearance is what matters for political stability. The reality is what matters for power. The French nobility did this constantly before 1789, making public shows of contributing to the kingdom, while the real wealth stayed protected in family estates, church holdings, and noble privileges. When the revolution came, the public discovered just how little the aristocracy had actually been contributing. But here's where it gets psychologically sophisticated. Every system needs cover, and that cover comes from high-income earners who aren't actually high-wealth owners. In America, the top 1% of income earners pay 40% of income taxes. In the UK, the top 1% pays about 29% of income tax revenue. In France, it's similar. These statistics get repeated endlessly, creating the impression that the wealthy carry the tax burden. But there's a crucial distinction. High income doesn't mean high wealth. The surgeon earning $800,000 pays massive taxes. The heir to a $200 million fortune structured through trusts and corporations might pay almost nothing. But in public discourse, they're both the wealthy. So when the surgeon complains, and she will loudly, it creates the impression that wealthy people are heavily taxed. Meanwhile, the trust fund heir's exemption stays invisible. This pattern plays out globally. In every country, high-earning professionals, doctors, lawyers, successful entrepreneurs, pay substantial taxes and complain publicly. Their complaints provide political cover for the structural exemptions enjoyed by inherited wealth and investment fortunes. Machiavelli saw this exact dynamic in Renaissance Europe. Wealthy merchant families, actively engaged in trade, paid various taxes and complained loudly. The great banking families operated through credit instruments taxed differently or not at all, but the merchant complaints created the impression that everyone wealthy was contributing equally. In medieval France, wealthy bourgeoisie and cities paid substantial taxes while the nobility were largely exempt. But the bourgeoisie's complaints obscured the aristocracy's advantages. The visibility of one group's taxation made the other group's exemption less obvious. While we debate income taxes, consumption and payroll taxes do the real work of funding governments worldwide. In America, payroll taxes generate 35% of federal revenue. In France, social charges account for even more. Britain's national insurance contributions are substantial. Germany's social insurance system is extensive. Across Scandinavia, despite progressive reputation, VAT and payroll taxes are high. These taxes share characteristics everywhere. They hit from the first dollar earned, allow minimal deductions, and fall disproportionately on working people. Someone earning $60,000 in America pays over $9,000 in payroll taxes before seeing anything. Someone in France pays even more in social charges. A worker in Brazil faces immediate payroll deductions. Meanwhile, wealth that grows through appreciation, zero payroll tax anywhere, zero social charges in France, zero national insurance in Britain, zero social insurance in Germany. When wealth takes the form of assets rather than wages, it escapes the taxes that fund social programs everywhere. In Renaissance Europe, different taxes applied to different classes. Peasants paid tithes and feudal dues unavoidably. Their labor was visible, their production monitored. Noble income from estates was harder to track, easier to shelter. Merchant wealth from trade faced more taxation than banking wealth from credit. The mechanisms have changed, but the structure is identical. Labor is trapped and taxed. Capital is mobile and protected. Here's where systems globally achieve remarkable elegance: philanthropic exemptions. When a billionaire donates appreciated assets, they receive tax benefits without the money necessarily reaching charitable work immediately, or sometimes ever. In America, Private foundations and donor-advised funds can hold money indefinitely. In the UK, charitable trusts provide similar benefits. In Germany, family foundations combine tax benefits with family control. The Netherlands has generous philanthropic deductions with minimal oversight. Switzerland's foundation system is notoriously flexible. Compare this to working people anywhere. Their charitable giving faces caps, limitations, and restrictions. As one legislator put it, "It's important that people support the expenses of government." But this principle applies only to labor income, not to capital wealth. This would be instantly familiar to Machiavelli and anyone in Renaissance Europe. Wealthy families funded churches, monasteries, and religious art across Italy, Spain, Germany, France. It looked like piety. Some of it genuinely was. But it also served strategic purposes: political influence, public reputation, and, crucially, wealth channeled into these institutions was often beyond secular tax collectors' reach. When the Fugger family funded the Sistine Chapel, or the Medici financed San Lorenzo Church, they weren't just thinking about salvation. Church wealth was protected wealth. Charitable giving was political strategy. In medieval England, nobles would grant lands to monasteries. This looked generous, but often came with ongoing benefits to the family while removing the property from royal taxation. The Reformation partly occurred because secular rulers wanted access to church wealth that had been accumulating tax-free for centuries. Here's why this matters beyond fairness. Machiavelli lived when a handful of families controlled European power structures. The Medici in Florence, the Sforza in Milan, the Borgia in Rome, the Fuggers in Bavaria, the Tudor aristocracy in England. He watched how concentrated wealth became concentrated power, became the ability to rewrite rules, became more concentrated wealth. The cycle feeds itself. And at a certain point, you're not talking about inequality, you're talking about the end of Republican government. This pattern plays out globally today. In America, $46 trillion of concentrated wealth shapes politics. In Russia, oligarchs who accumulated wealth during privatization now effectively control the state. In India, a handful of family conglomerates have unprecedented political influence. In Mexico, Carlos Slim's wealth gives him extraordinary power. In South Korea, the chaebols, family-controlled conglomerates, shape national policy. Different cultures, different systems, identical dynamics. When wealth concentrates beyond certain thresholds, institutional rules can't contain it. The money rewrites the rules. Machiavelli spent years trying to keep the Florentine Republic alive, to create institutions that could survive without one family dominating everything. It failed. The Medici returned, and from exile he could see why. Wealth concentration eventually overwhelms democratic institutions. The French aristocracy looked unchallengeable until 1789. The Russian nobility seemed permanent until 1917. The pattern repeats. Systems built on extreme inequality eventually face reckoning. Some countries have experimented with wealth taxes. France tried one, but abandoned it. The wealthy simply moved. Spain has a modest one that's easily avoided. Switzerland's cantonal wealth taxes exist, but the rich shop between cantons for the best rates. The problem Machiavelli would recognize. Wealth is mobile. Governance is territorial. The wealthy can move to Monaco, to Singapore, to Dubai, to wherever offers the best treatment. Workers can't. Better approaches exist, but require coordination. Tax appreciation at death or transfer. Canada does this successfully. Close inheritance loopholes. Some European countries do better than others. Require actual charitable payout. Possible with political will. Coordinate internationally to prevent capital flight. Difficult, but not impossible. The EU has made some progress on corporate tax coordination. OECD's work on base erosion and profit shifting addresses some issues. But these efforts constantly face opposition from countries competing for capital. Machiavelli would tell us systems built on obvious contradictions eventually collapse. You can maintain them through force, through ideology, through careful management, but not forever. In the 16th century, German peasants revolted against a system where they paid tithes while nobility were exempt. They lost, brutally. In 1789, French revolutionaries overthrew an aristocracy that had exempted itself from taxes everyone else paid. The Second Estate fell. In the early 20th century, Russian revolutionaries destroyed a system of extreme inequality. The result was hardly better. But the old system couldn't survive. The pattern throughout history, systems that concentrate wealth while exempting the wealthy from common burdens, eventually face crisis. Not because inequality itself is untenable, humans tolerate vast inequality, but because exemption from shared sacrifice destroys the legitimacy necessary for social order. Machiavelli understood this. In his later work, Discourses on Livy, he was explicit. Concentrated wealth destroys republics, not because wealthy people are bad, but because structural incentives make capture inevitable. When inequality reaches certain levels, the wealthy have more to gain by capturing the state than by participating in civic life. They stop being citizens and become their own nation within a nation, subject to different rules with different interests. We're watching this globally, not just in America with its $1.8 trillion deficit next to $46 trillion in concentrated wealth, but in Britain with its parallel system for the wealthy. In India, with its billionaire-friendly policies while rural poverty persists. In Brazil, with its tax havens while social services crumble. In country after country, the pattern repeats. Machiavelli died in 1527, still relatively poor, still shut out from power. The Medici eventually produced popes and queens, ruled Florence for centuries. His predictions about concentrated power were correct. His warnings went unheeded. But we have the advantage of history. We can see what happens when wealth concentrates beyond democratic control. We've watched it play out in Renaissance Italy, Revolutionary France, Gilded Age America, dozens of other times and places. The question isn't whether current systems are sustainable. History answers that. They're not. Systems this contradictory eventually face reckoning. The real question is whether we'll reform before crisis or wait for collapse. We could fix this. Tax appreciation at transfer points, close inheritance loopholes, require charitable funds to reach the public, coordinate internationally to prevent capital flight, make systems work as advertised rather than as camouflage. But making this happen requires confronting something uncomfortable. The wealthy don't pay taxes not because they're clever, but because we've built systems globally over decades that define their wealth as exempt. And these systems maintain themselves because those who benefit have resources to ensure they continue. Machiavelli's final lesson wasn't about being ruthless. It was about facing reality. Systems built on profound contradictions between appearance and reality eventually collapse. The appearance of progressive taxation can't indefinitely substitute for actual progressive taxation. The comfortable fictions we maintain, that estate taxes work, that the wealthy pay their share, that high income means high wealth, that charitable giving always serves the public. These fictions feel sustainable until suddenly they're not. History suggests we're closer to that moment than we think. The pattern is global. The dynamics are accelerating. And the question facing every country isn't whether change comes, but whether it comes through institutional reform, or through the kind of crisis that destroys institutions entirely. We can choose reform, or like Florence, like France, like so many systems before us, we can maintain the comfortable fictions until they're no longer maintainable.